And welcome back to Coast. George Noria with you. Acclaimed spiritual medium and popular author Carol J. Obley has been the bridge between heaven and earth in more than 14,000 group and individual readings. Names, descriptions of loved ones, personalities, and uncanny validating details, as well as grief support and teachings about the afterlife, are typically delivered in her readings. An advanced intuitive, she also regularly delivers specific, practical guidance and readings about many life issues, relationships, business, and spirituality. She is recognized for bringing compassion and integrity to mediumship by her very sincere intent to be of service to others through her skills and experience. One of her books includes Wisdom from the Spirit World, also Soul to Soul Connections, I'm Still With You, and Embracing the Ties That Bind. Carol, welcome back. How have you been?
Good evening, George. Very good.
Excellent. You getting ready for Thanksgiving? It's coming up fast.
It is. Well, I've been busy. I'm busy writing my fifth book, so I think the time has just sort of slipped away. I don't know if you know how that is. I know that you've written, but it's a lot of work, and in addition to keeping up with readings and teaching, too.
When do you publish this next book?
I expect it to be out probably, the publisher takes some time, so probably early 2025 or late next year.
Okay, great. Well, make sure you get back on the program for that, okay?
I will indeed.
Tell us a little bit more about how you got these abilities, Carol.
In another lifetime.
Aha.
Quite honestly. It just sort of came to me, and I'll tell you, it wasn't real pleasant how it happened, but, I've spoken about this many times and written about it in my books, that I had a fire that happened. I was running a completely different type of business, and overnight the place burned, and so I was unable to rebuild. And for about a year, I had no clue what I was going to do. And I magically stepped onto this pathway through a metaphysical center near where I live. And from there, everything just really accelerated. And that's usually what happens when we meet with what our soul had planned to do before we were born. Things just really fall into place. And that's true for anybody. And there was a lot of work involved, to be able to do what I do, a lot of training and so forth. But that's how I came to be. And it wasn't when I was young. It was when I was in my mid-30s that happened.
That's fantastic. Now, what do you distinguish the difference between the physical world and the spiritual world in terms of who's on what side?
Yeah, the main difference, this place that we're in, this earth, is very similar to the spirit world. Everything that exists here exists there. The difference is the density that we're in here. Things are moving very slowly compared to the consciousness of the spirit world, which is a relatively higher vibration. And it's basically a place of thought. That's the best way I would describe it. It's a dimension in which when you think about something, it instantly manifests. Here we have the element of time. That's not so in the spirit world. If you think about something, you're automatically doing it. You're instantly at that place, or, you've manifested what you were thinking about. So here we have time. There is no time.
Carol, does the spirit world interject feelings about things that are happening?
Yes. Sometimes. You're referring to what's going on here on the earth.
Yes, and they react to it,
Yeah, sometimes. I would say quite honestly, yes. Mostly, there is a tone to the delivery of messages that I've gotten in, thousands and thousands of readings that is very different from that which is here. And the main difference is that it almost always, from the spirit world, has a spiritual content to it. And even if that person, if that soul wasn't the best, didn't live the best life when they were here, there's this sort of awakening that occurs when that person has died and gone into spirit. So the tone is very different. There's really, a dissolving of the personality, of the ego, and it's much more of a purity of, the values that we need to have.
Does a person who has died know that they have died, or does it take a while?
Sometimes it's instantaneous because the person has, been in that state of sort of drifting and, going to that higher dimension. Other times, and I trust the information I get from my spirit team and from those who have communicated with me in the spirit world, and sometimes they'll say, this person spent a long time adjusting when they initially came over here. They didn't realize that they were no longer encapsulated in the physical body. So, sometimes it's what we would consider like sleeping, but it's really sort of a cocoon-like state in which the soul, is more pure. It's sort of like a dissolving of everything that has occurred here. And the best analogy I can give you, and I'm sure listeners can really identify with this, my spirit team told me that when we die, when we go to the spirit world, life, when we look at life, it's very much like when we awaken from having a dream. When we're in that dream, it's very real. And, unless we're doing lucid dreaming, we really don't realize, that we're dreaming. And it's that way with life as well. We look back on it, we go, wow, that seems so absolutely real when we were in it. But now when I look at it, it seems unreal. There's sort of this awakening that takes place.
Are there any regrets on the spirit side about things that they may have done in their living moments?
Absolutely. And that certainly doesn't happen in every reading. But I do not censor or filter the readings when I'm doing private readings. And in all the communications that I've done, there have been regrets, most notably about being self-centered, about behaviors, addictions, not spending enough time with loved ones, regrets, about wasting time, believe it or not, worrying or being very anxious about things that had never came to pass. So, yes, in that sort of retrospect, and most people have heard that we get the life review, which really happens in the matter in equivalent of seconds in time, that we see our entire life from birth to the point where we crossed over. In that time frame, we're able to really judge ourselves and how well we did. And in that life review, we really see that did I do okay with what I had intended before I came there, or am I going to need more experience with that, here in the spirit world, or when I go back, in another physical body, am I going to need to address these same lessons?
Carol, how do you feel about reincarnation?
Well, prior to beginning readings almost 30 years ago, I had read a lot of books. I am still a voluminous reader. I read a lot of different things, and not just metaphysical things, but usually metaphysically themed. I had read about reincarnation, but when I had my first experience of it, George, it totally floored me. I was doing readings in Pittsburgh, and people would come, and it was sort of the mundane sorts of questions. What about my job? What about my relationship? What do you see with money? Those sorts of things. And all of a sudden, I would have these scenes arise over the person's right shoulder. And at first, I was astonished by that. I really didn't understand what it was. And when I started having enough confidence to relay it to the individual, they would say, "Oh, that's funny. I've always been drawn to that particular country, or I've always struggled with this particular challenge, or, I've thought about that a lot." And so it sort of came together that what I was seeing were reflections of that person's prior experiences here on the earth. And it took me some time before, I wanted to really tell those to people, relay them to people, but it just arose organically. It rose quite unexpectedly for me. And we do, in fact, have multiple lifetimes. I once read that one lifetime is the equivalent of one grain of sand on a beach.
Wow.
Doesn't that blow your mind?
It does. That's amazing.
I absolutely, I think it is, yeah, when you really think about it. So what we need to really understand is that the eternal part of us, which is the soul, goes on forever. And whenever we came about, whenever that was, we go through multiple experiences here. And also, I might add, on other planets. Edgar Cayce, the famous American psychic, wrote about that too.
That is so true. We're with Carol Obley. Her website is soulvisions.net, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. When a person dies in their sleep, Carol, it happened months ago to the actor Ray Liotta, for example. Do they know they've died right away, or, do they walk out of their body looking around? What happens?
Well, this is actually kind of personal to me because I lost my father about a year and 3 months ago.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And, yeah, he had a very nice life. He was 93. My spirit team actually came to me, I don't know, several months after Dad passed and said, your father didn't realize that he was gone. And I believe that. And they said he was looking for you. and other people. We have a very small family. But I went to see him every day, when he was in the process of transitioning. And so when they told me that, I really resonated with that. I believe that. So, yes, I believe that is true for people, that they're confused.
Well, it's kind of foggy for people, isn't it?
Yeah, and George, that's why there are these souls on the other side called helping. They're helping spirits, for lack of a better word. That's what I call them, are helping spirits. And they really help. They're sort of guides for orientation, when we go over after being here. And so they help in that process of adjustment to going back home, because it really is our natural home. This is sort of a foreign land to us, believe it or not. So those special guides help souls who are very confused. Cases of very unexpected passings. That's another example. Someone who perhaps passes in a car crash, somebody who is murdered. Sometimes those souls sort of hang around, and they're very curious as to why they look down and they see their body there, but they're not there. Their consciousness is not there. So yes, there are different examples of what you mentioned.
Did you ever doubt the existence of the afterlife? Did it ever cross your mind?
Never that. I've always known, and I don't mean know in my head, but in my heart or in my gut, that we go on after we leave here. From the time I was a very young child, I used to walk with my grandma. I was about 6, 7 years old. We would walk through a graveyard, and to get to a place where we would buy penny candy. I'm dating myself on that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You probably remember penny candy. And I would ask my grandmother.
It was a nickel. It was a nickel for me, Carol, in those days.
Okay. The Swedish fish were good. So when we walked through this graveyard, I would say to my grandma, "Where is that person whose name and photo?" This is a Catholic cemetery. They put photographs of especially children who had passed on the tombstone. And I would say, "Grandma, where is that person now?" And, she would just say, "Well, they went to heaven." And I would stand there and sort of gaze at the tombstone, and I would wonder about why would God, take a child? Why would somebody so young go back to heaven? So even when I was very young, I was extremely curious about many, many paranormal things, many metaphysical things. I read about UFOs when I was about 7 years old, if that tells you anything.
Were you hooked?
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with the book Flying Saucers, Serious Business.
Oh, yes, by Frank Edwards.
Frank Edwards, yes.
How about that? Pretty good, huh?
So that was, I believe, that was in the 60s. So, yeah, from the time I was a young girl, I was very into this. The other big one for me, the Bermuda Triangle.
Oh, yeah, those were huge. The Barney and Betty Hill abduction case was great, too, wasn't it?
Oh, my gosh, I love that case. I absolutely love that case. And you probably have seen the movie of it.
Yeah, the one with James Earl Jones.
Yes. Yeah, and so all of those topics, the metaphysical topics, from the time I was very, very young, I was drawn to them. And interestingly, George, I did not grow up in a household that was real open to this. Mediumship was never mentioned.
So there's no hereditary or genetics there, is there?
Well, not on my father's side because they were German, but my mom's side, absolutely. And we have musicians in the family. I'm just generally sensitive people. And so I believe that this came down, the ability that I have, not only from a previous incarnation, but from my mother's side. And interestingly, I usually see that with people who are sensitive, who are mediumistic, that it's usually inherited from their mom's side.
Hold on for a second, Carol. We're at a break. We'll come back and chat more about your incredible work. Carol Obley with us, and we'll do readings next hour. I'll tell you all about that later. And welcome back. George Norrie with you. Carol Obley with us. Carol's website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Her books are still available. How do people get your books, Carol? Amazon?
Yeah, they're on Amazon. They're on Kindle. You won't get an autographed copy there, though. You can only get that from me.
Aha. And that's worth it, too.
They are listed on my website.
Carol, religion teaches us that there's a heaven and a hell. What are your thoughts on that concept?
Well, there are certainly planes. When I say planes, I'm referring to planes of consciousness. There are certainly lower planes. The closer that you get to Earth, the denser and the less light, and I mean actual light, light that illuminates. The closer ones to Earth are denser, and they are relatively ugly compared to the higher planes where most people go. So absolutely, there are lower levels. I don't know that I would describe them as the biblical hell, but they certainly are not as pleasant as the higher levels. And you have to understand, though, we go where at the time of death we have a certain consciousness, so we can't go anywhere other than what is matching or what is resonating with that particular consciousness. And so, for example, a Hitler, isn't going to go to the higher levels. Jeffrey Dahmer is not going to go to the higher levels.
Right. Ted Bundy will not go to the higher levels.
Right. So there is really, there by the law of attraction, which is a valid natural law, we can only go where our consciousness is matching. And it's possible, George, for those in a higher plane to descend to a lower, for example, to help souls that are there or to, in some way commune with those souls. But it's not possible for lower souls to go to the higher levels.
What about the devil, Carol? Where does the devil fit in here, if at all?
Well, I go back and forth with that. Certainly there are lower astral entities, astral referring to the spirit world. Certainly they are there. One of the influences that they can have with people are through drugs and alcohol. Also, I believe to a certain degree, certain mental disorders. And I don't mean that in any disparaging way whatsoever, but there can be sometimes, not all the time, an influence with people that might be suffering from a mental illness. So absolutely those exist. I have had sleep paralysis. I think I've spoken about that on Coast before. And I've actually seen some of these, I don't know if you want to call them demonic or satanic energies that have come around. And they're very frightening, very, very frightening.
What do they want, Carol?
I believe that my theory on it is that they want some sort of control of the soul. And I used to get these quite frequently when I was much, much younger. And it was interesting because I was drinking heavily at the time, drinking alcohol heavily.
You were?
At the time, yeah, during my...
I would never have imagined that.
Actually, that's how I really jump-started my spiritual pathway, was through a 12-step recovery. And at the age of 25, I was dying.
Oh, my God, Carol.
Yeah.
Did you do drugs, too, or just alcohol?
Both. Yeah, I'm very transparent and as far as what I talk about with myself.
Well, that's good.
And, I really am very real. And so that's, that was a big problem. I was going straight down the tubes, and I believe that, divine intervention happened at that point. I mean, I was in my 20s, 25 when that occurred. But interestingly, that's when some of these night paralysis or night terror things were happening. And I think at that time, George, it was like really kind of a battle in a way. I don't mean to sound corny with this, but kind of a battle for my soul in some way. You know, which way was I going to choose? Which way was I going to go?
Well, they don't have it yet.
No. No, I have not drank alcohol. I never drink alcohol, and I haven't in 40 years. So,
where does God play a role in this, Carol?
Oh, my gosh. I can't imagine living life without God. Core to me, to everything I'm doing, to helping people. You know, I don't perceive as God as the biblical type of God. To me, I call it that entity spirit. If within everything, every blade of grass, every animal, every person, every tree, that force runs through everything. And it's a consciousness that's within all of us. And with that, with that recognition, there really is this great equality amongst every living thing. And it's our perception of, through the division here on this earth plane of duality that really causes that separation. But once you really get that the God energy or the God force is within every living being, then there isn't a division. There is not this group versus that group. And that's what I think people really, that's what humanity needs to realize, is that fundamental concept.
If a human dies and before they died, they wanted to make up with a friend or do something wonderful for somebody, and they never had the opportunity to do that because they died, does that haunt them in the spirit world? That they were never able to accomplish that?
Yes. In a nutshell, to answer that, yes, it does haunt them. It also, throughout many years of doing mediumistic readings for people often harbor regrets themselves, and a big one too is guilt. Well, I should have done this. I should have done that. I sat with my parent or my husband or wife, and they were dying, and I went up to go have lunch or something, and I came back and they had passed. And the person might carry guilt for a lot of years over that, whereas that soul wanted to quietly slip away and preserve their dignity and just, go into that good night, as they say. So guilt can be, and regrets can be very destructive, to our sense of well-being. And so, it's really an unproductive emotion. And that's on both sides of the veil. That comes from the spirit world and also from people here in the physical world.
Have you ever met a spirit you didn't like?
No. But I've met plenty of people in the living that I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
But usually, no. And, one thing I've been asked in many interviews, because I've done a lot of different media, but people will go, well, are there evil? Are there people who were bad people in life that come through and they're just mean?
Sure.
And I honestly, I haven't encountered that, although the personality will come through when that consciousness of that soul blends with mine. So say that it was a dad who was, physically abusive to the recipient of that reading, that will show up in the reading. And, so in that way, yes, it is known. But usually that person who was not a good person when they were here, they will often express regret about that because they've seen the implications of those choices that they made when they were here and how it affected other people.
Why does it seem that there's so many ghostly hauntings from the dead?
Well, sometimes there's an emotional attachment to something that was unfinished. Usually, just as a blanket statement, it's unfinished business on that person's behalf. You know, I had an experience several years ago. It was quite interesting.
What happened?
I met some friends for lunch, and across from that restaurant was an antique store. And just for a lark, we went there. We went into this antique store. And I was browsing through. I love old things. I love to look at the old things. And I stopped collecting because I just don't have any more room. But I turned around. I wasn't even thinking about anything to do with the spirit world, anything to do with mediumship or anything. And I turned around, and clairvoyantly, I saw a very dejected man, about, 35, 40 years of age. And he was sitting in front of one of these cubicles in this antique mall. And he had his face in his hands, and he was sitting there very depressed. I actually felt what he was feeling.
A live human or a ghost?
Oh, no. This was a spirit.
Okay.
And that's what I said. I saw him clairvoyantly. It was definitely was not physical. And he was so attached to those belongings that were in that particular cubicle that it was sort of like he didn't want to leave his belongings that were there. And so I went to the front of the store, and I said to the person, the clerk who was there, I said, "Where do these things come from in this antique mall?" And she said, "Oh, I get them from all over. The wood that we use here for the partitions, we got from old barns, and the different objects have come from all over the place." So I know that Coast has done things on haunted objects.
Yes, we were talking.
I really believe that now. I mean, I really.
Well, there's no question about it. We were talking about that with our previous guest who came on before you, Joshua Warren. He goes into antique stores just for that purpose.
Oh, that's very interesting. The synchronicity of my mentioning that, I didn't know that was his topic. But once I saw that, I felt a lot of sadness that spirit, was so attached to that stuff. He wouldn't leave. It was like there was a great sadness, with him. But yeah, I mean, there is a lingering that can occur. And also, I believe there's a replay in the etheric, which is the energy field that is closest to the earth, or also to the physical body. It's sort of a double. It's it's a doppelganger of the physical, and there's actually a replay that can happen, and particularly with strong emotions. That's why you get hauntings on, like some of these ships that have sunk and so forth, or historical places, battlefields, places, in which there was strong emotion.
Pretty dramatic stuff. It really is. Carol, at your website, can people email you and set up appointments?
Yeah, I prefer that they call my office, but I'm more of a in-person, and I manage my entire business myself.
Really? You have no assistants, huh?
I do not, and I'm a micromanager probably because I'm a sun sign Capricorn, But yeah, they can contact me that way as well.
We're going to take calls with Carol Obley next hour. She'll do psychic readings and medium readings. What's the difference between the two, Carol?
Psychism is more of reading that person in the physical body that is on the other end of the phone or on Zoom or in front of you, whereas mediumship is connecting or blending with a soul who is not here in the physical realm.
And do you prefer one against the other?
No, there's a blending. Most readings, there's a blending, or what I call life guidance. A lot of people ask about, things such as career, relationships, spirituality, money, all of those sorts of things. So that's what I would consider more psychic-oriented. Mediumship is an actual blending and connection with a soul who's not here physically.
All right, we're going to come back in just a moment here on Coast to Coast and take those calls. Get ready.